I'm so excited to have Kristian Ramos with me today. He's a messaging maestro. His expertise is in research and communications. Today, he's going to talk to us about his experience working with one of the most influential political leaders of our time. He's going to share personal stories about how research and messaging connect to voters, to neighbors, to friends and family, and how that impacts our everyday life. We're going to take a deep dive in his personal experiences and then talk about 2024 and what is to come. So join me, engage, empower, and evolve. We're going to talk with Kristian. Enjoy the show. Let's talk about creating a life and country we're proud of. Together, I'm your host, Alvina Vasquez. Welcome to Alvina Talks Shift. And welcome, Kristian.
Thank you. That is the nicest introduction I think anybody's ever given me. So I don't know how much of that is true. I feel like you definitely taught me a lot when we started talking, but I'll take it. Yeah, of course. It's a great way to start the week.
Well, I was looking at your bio and, trying to remember all of the stories that you've shared, but I know one of the most monumental times of your life was working for Senator Harry Reid. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So there's three things that I would say about my time with Harry Reid. And number one, I mean, there's been so much written about him, but he was a very pragmatic person. And I got the chance to work with him, and also I was one of the first people to read his autobiography when they were doing it. We had the proof version of it. I was reading it, and I was struck by how much it reminded me of my own great grandfather's story, Mexican American who worked with his hands. And Harry Reid's father worked in a mine, and people don't realize he came from nothing. Nothing. Searchlight, Nevada is like it's nothing right now. It just doesn't really exist anymore
Yeah.
as a city. And so he was just a very tough guy. And I think he took that into everything that he did. And I don't think we'll ever see a politician like that again. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that I'll never forget, which was a great lesson in politics, is everyone hated Harry Reid when he first became uh, leadership. Everyone. I distinctly remember I was a staff assistant. The people from Nevada hated him. The people within the caucus hated him. Reporters hated him, and he just stuck to his guns. And he did, what he needed to do to take back the leadership. And then suddenly everybody loves him. And so I just remember all of the eulogies that came out after he died from the different reporters and everybody else. And I remember when I worked for him, some of those reporters were not nearly as nice in their write-ups. So that was another good lesson for politics for me.
I guess at the time when you say he wasn't really liked, was it because he was too in the middle, or was it because he was too far to the left?
It's really funny that we're having this conversation. You always see this that Democrats in disarray. Every year there's some version of that story. When Harry Reid became minority leader, we had just lost. I think it was another campaign. And we had another terrible campaign cycle, and so it was less again because he just was not. He didn't present himself as a politician. He had replaced Tom Daschle, who was his mentor and somebody that he really looked up to. Tom Daschle is what people think of when they think of a politician who's very polished. And I think he got more polished as he grew into the role. But I think at the outset, no, he wasn't. He wasn't. But again, like he believed in the power of the Latino vote. He believed in the power of a progressive majority, and he really nurtured that. And again, he was very pragmatic about how he looked at the coalitions of the folks that he needed to win in his state and what he needed to do to take back the Senate. And I think he was always somebody who was very principled. He had his belief system and the things that he really cared about. And I think he was probably, this is going to get me in trouble. I think he was probably more moderate than his actual politics were, that what he did. But again, he was a
Interesting.
pragmatic guy and he knew what he needed to do to keep his caucus happy and to win on the national stage for the party. And so he was an incredible leader in that regard.
Well, for any folks listening who don't know who he is, definitely look into the history of Senator Harry Reid. I know for a lot of Latino organizations, he was a huge champion. And so it's really important to know that history. And you, as a Latino in politics at the time, I'm sure there wasn't that many that were super influential. So what was it like being there? Sometimes probably the only brown person in the room.
That's a very loaded question. For a number of reasons. First, I will say Harry Reid, more than any person that I've ever worked for, uh, really cared about making sure that his community was represented within his staff. And he did go out of his way to nurture and to make sure that he had folks that looked like his state working for him. And so I give him all the credit in the world. There's so many incredible operatives that went through that office: Jose Para, Maria Urbina, Jorge Silva, Angela Arboleda. I mean, there's a lot of like really heavy hitters that came through there. Federico de Jesus is another one. Ricardo Ramirez. I could go on and on. Uh, it was very hard for me personally, working at that level of politics. And I always tell people that I wish I had done it the opposite. In that, I wish I had started working for a mayor, then worked for a member, then worked for Senate leadership like that. It was a real fail as you go situation. And again, I learned a lot. You learn so much being in the room. You're literally every day you're talking to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, plus reporters from Japan, plus reporters from all over the world. And you're dealing with them. I was pretty effing bad at my job when I started. And I think that was, you know, I'm really grateful to my bosses, Riddell Molyneux, Jim Manley. A lot of folks were very patient with me, and when I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So, uh, yeah.
What about, okay, so let's talk more about your experience bringing folks together. So a lot of what we hear in the media is the country's divided. People are moving to different states where their political views are being better represented, and so that's creating a divide in our country. But through messaging and research that you've been doing, we know that there are certain issues that are just kind of at the heart and at the ground of all Americans, that they want those issues taken care of so that they can live a better life. So tell me more about that research. And are we as divided as everybody thinks?
I don't think so. I really don't think so. And I actually think Joe Biden as a president doesn't get enough credit for how he's governed, um, as he should because of that. You have 30% of the electorate that is hardcore MAGA. And 30% of an electorate that doesn't vote that much is actually not that big of a number. And I think what we've seen that has been different in the past is that those folks have the internet and they have the ability to turn that into a megaphone, into a fire hose, and really go out and spew hate everywhere. But I think by and large, people, they want the same things. The way that it was said to me that made the most sense, um, Simon Rosenberg, a mentor, somebody I worked with a number of years ago, still talk to from time to time. His view is that people just want to be able to take vacations and hang out with their kids and not really think about politics. And I think that's probably true by and large. And so, to the degree with which we can talk about, Democrats, progressives, how we're helping to improve people's lives, how we're giving people the time to be with their children and their families and their community, I think we're doing everybody a big favor. And I think a lot of this other stuff, I think most people don't think about at all until election season when it's just thrown in their face.
Have you worked with Republicans on projects?
Uh, I have Republican friends, and I would work with a principled Republican. I don't think Jason Miller would ever work with somebody like myself, right? I have my limits, and I go back to this thing. People don't like banning books, right? People don't like burning books. People don't like outlawing words. People like democracy. People are overwhelmingly for women having bodily autonomy. There is an ideological group out there, uh, MAGA, that doesn't support any of those things. And I think to the degree with there are folks that are not really paying attention to that and just don't like political correctness or whatever and get sucked into that sort of worldview. Um, yeah, I think that's a real thing. I think that exists. But by and large, there are good conservatives out there,
Yeah,
right? There are people uh, who I don't necessarily agree with 100%, but I respect their views. I think trickle down economics and all of that stuff is silly, but sure, if that's what you believe, I'd have a beer with somebody like that, and you know where it really changed for me, Alvina. I have a daughter, I have a kid, and my kid is in a school, and my kid makes friends with who she makes friends with. And some of those parents are conservative. Some of them have different views than I do. Am I going to tell my kid not to hang out with this other kid because I don't want to
right,
hang out with their parents? Like, it doesn't, that's not how it works in the real world. It's
right.
similar when I moved to the suburbs. I have neighbors who are, conservative. I have neighbors who are very religious. And, if my car broke down or if I ever needed a jump, they come over and jump my car. If somebody gets hurt and they need, me to help carry the yes, of course. I'm not going to say no just because you're not 100% aligned with my political ideology.
Yeah, I think the reason I bring that up is because I feel like maybe some people carry guilt. I know a lot of Latino families have mixed statuses, mixed political views, and so there shouldn't be any guilt in fostering those relationships if there's some ideological beliefs that they don't agree with. Obviously, there's some ideological beliefs that are, violent and not safe and for other communities, and I'm not talking about those extremes. I'm talking about when you're sitting at Thanksgiving dinner and your Theo's there and it makes you uncomfortable to be around this person because of their extreme views. Where do you find it, what's your advice to folks that are like at the table with these people that they love? It's a love-hate relationship. They love them because they hug them and they cook them food, but they're angry because they don't always believe what they believe.
So I think what's fascinating about what you're articulating, and it is a very real thing, but I don't think it's new. I think every Latino, this is the funny thing about the last, since 2016, I'm bad at math, however many years ago that was. Every Latino that I know has a tío, a cousin, somebody who is, let's just say, not politically correct, bordering on racist. Every single Latino I know has a family member that is like that. And so, again, it's not new to show up at Thanksgiving and have people say stupid, borderline racist things at Thanksgiving. What has changed is there is now a political ideology and a party that these people can now say, okay, this is for me. And they can be very vocal about it because Trump gave people permission to do that. But having, insensitive asshole relatives is not new. And so,
That's not new.
that's not a new phenomenon. And, I love my family. I always listen. I always listen. For me, it's actually great research when people say things to me. I had a family member years in the 2016 cycle say to me, well, Hillary, you know, she would be easy on the Russians. That's why I can't vote for her because, she's on the pockets of the Russians and whatever, whatever. And I was like, well, that's that sounds not real to me. But little did I realize online, there was all this stuff in right-wing media about Hillary was in bed with the Russians. Meanwhile, it was Donald Trump who literally was getting information, from Putin on all of this stuff. And so it's interesting. I will say here's the difference for me personally. When I hear stuff that is a little, you know, unbelievable, for lack of better words, when I go home and I talk to folks, I take it a lot more seriously because there is an ideology, there is a group of people that
Yeah.
takes this stuff and turns on the fire hose and aims it at, low information voters and has been very successful at that.
So I was thinking about this over the weekend. We're hearing the economy's doing good, it's recovering. Biden has a lot of initiatives he's put in place to kind of boost the economy. Jobs are, filling up. So, but we also know that there are still many folks who are not benefiting from that economy. How do you get them in the movement? How do you talk to them to get them to not be disillusioned with the political process?
Well, this is an important distinction that you're making, and I actually think this is the distinction that people really need to think through for 2024. I will disagree with the premise of your question in that there may be people who are having a hard time right now, but they are still benefiting from the economy. And what I mean by that is when you look at what's happened over the last 2.5 years of this president's administration, the lowest wage earners have seen the highest wage growth. And then there would be an argument that you would hear, well, that wage growth has been eaten up by inflation. And I would say two things to that. One, can you imagine if they hadn't had that wage growth? If they hadn't had those investments made in them, and how much more they would be in the hole if that didn't exist? And then the second thing I would point people to is we are nearly at 2% inflation. Inflation has dropped for the last 17 months. And so what you see in the polling is very clear. This with Latinos, with everybody. My personal finances, my personal view of my future, very positive. My view of the government, my view of the national economy is very negative. And then you look at the advertising data, you look at the Facebook buys, everything that the Republicans is talking about, inflation and cost prices, cost of living, it's all negative. And then on the Democratic side, we don't talk about. Some people do. Some people in DC, sure, but you certainly not to the scale that the Republican narratives are like a fire hose again, right? And what they do, and I spent a lot of time looking at this. They say, listen, Democrats, they spent a lot of money to help people not work, and you, the hard worker, didn't get anything out of this. When the reality is the opposite. We
Yeah.
can provide resources to help people who are working, right? And we can also take care of the people who are struggling and need help. And that would be what I would say, the premise of your question. Yes, people are struggling. Look at the fight we just had over the debt ceiling fight. Their whole premise was that we had to stop government spending to help working people. When they made this argument, their whole premise was that they were going to cut all the programs that hurt working people.
That hurt the most. Oh my God, I know.
And so, like, this is where I feel like Democrats are like, I don't know why we don't talk about this more. I mean, their whole thing is, well, we got to cut Social Security, we got to cut Medicaid, we got to, cut all these things, and at the same time, they're like, let's give corporate tax breaks to these huge corporations and the mega wealthy, and then let's not talk, then let's not pay for them. Well, what does that do? It
I know.
creates a deficit. It creates all these things that they're supposed to be against.
I mean, from a messaging standpoint, that's super frustrating that we have these solutions in place. Um, the other side tends to kind of, like you said, they're kind of gaslighting everybody into thinking that they're the ones doing anything. So, what do electeds from municipal all the way up to the president, what messaging do they need to start using to better tell those messages?
I think it's two things. One, we have got to be more optimistic. We have to be more positive. If we're out there saying that everything sucks and Republicans are out there saying everything sucks, guess who the voter hears that and they're like, yeah, everything does suck. I'm going to vote these Democrats out because they haven't done anything. When we know that the opposite is the case, and I feel like this is where I get frustrated with the party and the apparatus. I think everybody wants to be very academic, policy oriented, when really all we need to do is I am fine feeling people's pain, but we also have to acknowledge and tell the story of what we've done to help alleviate that pain, and then tell the story about what we're doing to make their lives better in the future. And so I think we've done way too much of the wallowing and the feeling bad. You know, this is another thing that I just taken from my personal life. I distinctly remember at the height of COVID, I would get these messages from Democrats, everything sucks, everything's terrible, da 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 da. And I was like, I know everything sucks. I know everything's terrible. I'm living this right now. What are we doing to make it better? What have you done to help me right now? That's the thing that I think is sorely missing within our our movement, our whatever. We have done things to improve people's lives. Are we telling that story? Are we, being optimistic and saying, there's more to do? Sometimes. So on the local level, that's absolutely, when I work with people who are in local politics, it is all that. It is 100% like, okay, well, my kid isn't in school right now. I need you to put my kid back in school. And, eggs cost this much and so on and so forth. And so, like, I do think Republicans are very good at talking about that stuff in ways that is not something that I think most Democrats even think about on the national level.
So, what made you get into research and storytelling and building those coalitions? Where did you get started?
Uh, by accident, really. I wanted to be a writer. I didn't really care about politics at all. And I got into it because I thought it was more stable than my current than going into politics. And or no, going into writing. So I thought that being a writer was not something that I could do realistically, but I could do politics, and that was a more stable thing. And the punchline to that is, of course, that politics is probably as chaotic as if I had tried to be a writer, but it really does come out of wanting to tell stories and wanting to reach people and wanting to move people. And it said this podcast is probably going to get me in trouble for saying half the shit I'm saying here, but I do feel like that's a secondary thing for a lot of people in our space. They don't really care about moving people or making people feel good or anything really. So it is a lot of numbers and crosstabs and this, that, or the other. And I feel like sometimes people just forget that the audience they're trying to reach, they have a family and they have a job and they don't do this all day. And it should be simple and it should, be emotional.
So, that kind of goes into my next question, and you kind of brought this up a little bit, but since building your family, how have your politics or your career or anything major changes in the way that you look at things and your perspectives?
When you have a, I mean, you're recently a parent as well, I believe. Um, you just everything that isn't essential to your this is my experience. Other people's may be different, but I think everything that is not essential to that lifestyle of being a parent and being present and everything else, it kind of goes out the door. And a lot of the stuff that really mattered before doesn't really matter as much. And I just distinctly remembering like, oh, I got a mortgage now. Oh, I got a car. I got to figure out school. Who's talking about that? Like, who's telling me how I'm going to do all that stuff? And so it was a huge change for me because those are things I did not care about at all before. I had I had I lived in an apartment in downtown DC, and I would walk to the grocery store, and so it is vastly different. Uh, you know, living in an apartment and everybody there is ideologically the same as you. Everyone is more or less of the same economic strata, and so on and so forth. When you come into a neighborhood, there's some people who've lived here for like 60 years or whatever, their whole life essentially. And so their views and their what they care about is very different than my own. And I am in one of the most probably progressive, democratic leaning counties in the country. But still you find that, when you start talking to people and you're like, whoa, you're seeing this very differently than I am. And that's normal. That's a good thing. I think, if anything, that I feel like it's helped me be more aware of that disconnect, perhaps. But how a lot of people view the world, and how people in DC view the world.
Okay, so let's look forward. What do we have to look forward to in 2024? What do we need to get done? What do we need to keep our eye on?
2024. So it's two pieces, right? One, we have to figure out how to tell the story of the last 2.5 years. I just came out of the field with some focus groups in Arizona and Nevada. And I don't know, Alvina, if you've ever, managed focus groups, but you learn a lot directionally from watching them. And I think it was like 18 hours of focus groups that we had to sort of parse. But one thing that came loud and clear is that people did not really have any concept of what Democrats had done for the last 2.5 years. And
Interesting.
there was a huge frustration. And as a result of not having sort of this baseline understanding of what had, occurred, a lot of these Republican status threat narratives around the economy were resonating. And it was, I guess, stark in how much some of these ideas had taken root within some of the panelists. And a lot of people say, well, it's directional, and you can't take too much from focus groups, which I think is fair. But I think one of the things that really struck me, that has stayed with me since now, since we did them, one of the panelists said something to the effect of, well, my family, we had to rely on food stamps. We had to rely on government assistance for growing up, and I know how hard that is, and I understand that. But Democrats are paying people not to work right now, and I really don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many layers
Yeah.
to that statement. This is a Latino man, right? Uh, who is, of course, entitled to his opinion. I mean, that's how he views the world. But setting aside some of the more, you know, depressing elements of that, he really believes that Democrats were paying people not to work, which, 13.3 million jobs created, more small businesses created, better health care, better social safety net, to provide people with the ability to create their own jobs, to work in better jobs. And so that was just not entering into this gentleman's head. And so, I do believe we need a positive narrative to reach these voters, to tell the story of how we've helped. But the real heroes are the voters, the people who are waking up and going to work and working two jobs, and providing for their family or providing for their community. And I think the way that Democrats tend to do this work is they make Joe Biden or the Democrats the hero of the story. And really, it should be the reverse. The small business owner is the hero. Joe Biden has helped him. Joe Biden has helped him by providing the resources that he needs to create opportunity for his family, for his community. That's what voters really believe and want to hear. And so I do think that Republicans are much more attuned to that sort of desire, to tell those stories, than I think Democrats are. It's funny because this tends to bleed into the sort of the Latino vote thing. Like Latinos are more conservative, Latino or da da da. None of that is true. And it's not true that there has been some sort of shift between, from to more Latino Republicans because of how extreme MAGA has become. If there was any sort of opening that existed, it almost doesn't matter because, again, Latinos don't like banning books. They don't like banning words. They don't like taking away reproductive rights from women. They don't like corporations, right? They don't like a lot of these things, right? They're pro-business and they're pro-opportunity. They're pro all of those things. The Republican Party is not providing them the resources to do those things. Democrats are.
So it's interesting because that just brought up Florida to me. What is going on in Florida? What's your take?
My take is a numbers one. So in 2018, I think outside groups spent something over $50 million to reach Latinos, or to reach, they just outside money in Florida was something over $50 million. You want to guess what it was in 2022?
Probably not that much.
It was $1.5 million.
Wow.
Ron DeSantis ran 5 times more Spanish language ads than his opponent did. So if one side is able to say whatever they want statewide repeatedly, and the other side is not able to rebut it or to put forward their own narrative, you're going to get, big numbers like DeSantis did. But as we've seen, DeSantis
is he going to get the repercussions?
I think, well, he already is. I think what people don't realize is, the stuff that DeSantis did in Florida in 2022 does not work nationwide. All of the horrible things like banning books, banning words, that's all Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis took MAGA and he's gone like way, way to the extreme in all of this stuff. And it's not popular.
Yeah.
He's actually dropped, the last I checked, he may have dropped more, but he's dropped 19 points since he started in 2022. Since 2022, since his re-elections, he's dropped 19 points in Florida.
Wow.
He is 25 points behind Biden or Trump everywhere. He's sinking like a stone. So when I say that this stuff isn't popular, it's really not popular nationally.
Okay, so my final question is for the young people out there, because I know that through our experiences, we have like moments where we made a huge mistake, and at the time it felt like a big deal. But it probably wasn't, and we should have gotten over it a lot sooner. So do you have any good stories of like something that you could not
You're really trying to get me in
sleep
trouble.
over, and you look back now and you're like, that was not a big deal?
You're gonna get me in trouble here. No, I mean, so I'm gonna start with cliches that I always try to tell my daughter because I think, I don't know, it's helpful. One, I always tell her is, everything works out in the end. If it hasn't worked out yet, it's not the end. That has proven to be
That's
true
good
to
advice.
me. And the other part of it is I have made probably every mistake that you possibly could make as a professional. I've quit jobs that I shouldn't have. I've, made people angry that I shouldn't have. I've always spoken my mind when I probably shouldn't have. But my advice to any young person is if you really care about it, the real secret is you have to get up one more time than you get knocked down. If you keep getting up after that one more time, and if you're willing to go through hell, then nobody can really tell you not to do something. But that's a choice you have to make, really.
Yeah.
Because there are times where, it takes longer sometimes to come back from some of this stuff than it should. But I mean, the name of my company is Autonomy Strategies for that reason. I just, I always try to do the right thing. I always try to live such that, if you saw, somebody told me this years ago, before I had kids. They said the thing about the internet is your kid, when they're old enough, can Google your name and they can see everything that you've done. Everything. It is all online. And so I do, you have one name in this life. You do. And if you have to live by your values and your the things that matter to you. And that's not always aligned with everyone that you work with and everywhere that you work with. And those are just decisions that you have to make. But it really is as simple as getting up one more time than you've been knocked down. You just got to get up, you know. So that's a personal choice.
That is a personal choice. I know I've done it a couple of times. Awesome. Well, thank you for being with me today. I know this is a big deal for me to have you here with me. It's a huge honor. And I look forward to keep talking to you and working together, hopefully, in the next year or so.
Let's do it. You let me know. I'm here.
All right.
I'm ready. Thanks, Alvina.
Thanks, Kristian. Thank you for watching Alvina Talks Shift. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, engage, empower, evolve. If you liked this episode, or if you want more content like this, go to alvinatalkshift.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.